All right, guys. So I had to go live. I couldn't contain it any longer. This situation with Damar Hamlin is just another example of how soft we have become as a society. So, first things first, this is a tragedy. It's a sad event. A football player out there in the prime of life, 24 years old, he collapses from what appears to be a heart attack. But the other tragedy that has ensued is the total loss of any sort of manly fortitude, any ability to figure out what next steps to take, even the ability to ask reasonable questions in the wake of this tragedy. I was on Twitter during this whole situation, and I want to highlight two tweets in particular. One was Skip Bayless, who is a white man, and he's on Undisputed, and he says a lot of things, and he even talks about how much he's always kind of trolling LeBron James on Undisputed, but Skip Bayless simply asks, "Hey, this is a really important game, but obviously all of that pales in comparison." That very tweet prompted calls for him to be fired because he dared to ask, do we resume our lives after this tragedy, or do we just curl up in a shell of emotional, I guess what I would call it is being just emotionally impotent, where you completely cannot see anything else beyond the tragedy. And then I want to highlight another tweet by Charlie Kirk, which again ended up getting him called the most despicable human being, a waste of human flesh, less than human, all of these things, because he dared to ask and suggest that it's interesting, especially after everyone was forced or mandated to take this COVID vaccine. It's interesting that now we're starting to see athletes collapse. And he's just saying, it's just an interesting thing. He wasn't even saying that it happened, that it was because of COVID. But one thing we knew is that the NFL mandated that all players take this COVID vaccine. And so he asked that question, and everyone just came full force because I guess in the midst of tragedy, when everybody's feeling something emotionally, when you've been told by the media how to feel, that all logic, all thinking, all objective reasoning as to maybe why something occurred just goes out the window. And why I titled this that it's making society soft is that what I notice in this circumstance is that this is definitely a great deal of compassion. I don't say that the compassion is misplaced because obviously it's a tragedy. It's a young man who has the rest of his life ahead of him and ends up collapsing, and people are doing CPR. But we've seen many football games in which people have undergone pretty serious injury. And just because of the CPR, it seems, is why everybody was so bothered when we've seen football players be paralyzed. We've seen football players go and never be the same again. We've seen football players after their playing career, maybe, perhaps, because of head injuries, we've seen football players shoot themselves and kill themselves. Some shooting themselves in the chest because they wanted their brains examined for any potential injuries so that it could be studied because they've taken so many hits. And so we've got this circumstance in which everyone doesn't want to anymore be objective because we've just been told to be emotional about the situation. It's funny that this is actually reminiscent to me of January 6th. It's an interesting parallel because same thing, January 6th, it was just, oh, everybody just be sad. Oh my gosh, this is devastating. This is a tragedy. This is worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This is worse than the burning of Washington in the War of 1812. Like, we hear all of these superlatives like this was the worst thing that ever happened in society. And why I say that we've become so soft is that here we have a football player who collapses, and yet there are many many occupations in which men every single day are risking their lives, and some of them do collapse and die of heart attacks. You've got people working in prisons right now with convicted felons. Any moment that they walk through that tier or on that yard, they could be shanked to death. They could be killed any moment, and many have. And yet no one's going on Twitter doing a big to-do about them and their lives. So what makes his life more important than the lives of other people? And furthermore, when those sort of tragedies happen, when you're working a real job, not to say football's not a real job, but when you're working a job in which there is an occupational hazard, guess what? Everyone starts asking the questions as to what was the cause of the accident. Can we do something about the camera angles? Can we figure out what caused this person to do it? And yet Charlie Kirk asks a pertinent question. He says, hey, we noticed that people are dropping dead. They're dying suddenly. And it's interesting that this person had a heart condition. They were defibrillating him because of his heart. And we know that myocarditis is one of the side effects of this COVID vaccination. And it presents itself sometimes in ways that are detectable, but in other ways that are latent until the right stimulus is received. And then all of a sudden, we say, mysteriously, this person dropped dead. And so when Charlie Kirk asks this pertinent question, everybody, the knives come out for him, right? Because he's already hated. And how dare he stop our crying session? Because we're too busy crying. We don't want to know what happened. America is becoming extremely soft. Could you imagine these same people who are racked with pain and they just want to wallow in the sorrow of the tragedy itself? Can you imagine those people storming the beaches of Normandy or in World War II where you just have a gun and you're running towards the enemy and men are falling to your left and to your right side, and then you say, hey guys, hey Japanese, hey Germans, please time out. My friend just died over here. I'm sorry, I'm too sad. I'm so sad right now. Please, can we just take a break from the shooting? Same thing with people that die in coal mining accidents. Yes, there's sadness. Yes, the coworkers are hurt. But then they go back to work. And that very mention, the very mention of the potential and possibility of going back to work is Skip Bayless's huge crime. That he dared to mention that this is important, that this is an NFL season, he dared to talk about playing a game when we know that there are people who are working the concession stands who now have no work to do. We know that there are people who are making money whose very jobs it is to work NFL games in various capacities, who now, because of this tragedy, because we're caught up in our feelings and emotions, don't get an opportunity now to feed their families. We're piling tragedy upon tragedy. We have people that need to get to work, and I'm sick of this soft society because this is exactly the same sort of emotionalism that caused us to lock down during COVID and just give up. Just give up on your kids' education, give up on people being able to go for routine medical care. Just give up on the finances, give up on the economy, just start printing money so people could feel good about themselves and then reap the consequences later of that behavior. And so this is evidence of a very effeminate society. I think that men understand and should understand, especially when we're talking in context of football, that tragedies happen. It is sad. We need to learn from them, and then we need to actually move on. And I would add to that from a Christian perspective, when you're looking at this tragedy, and if you're someone who is racked with sadness and sorrow over this situation, then maybe consider yourself and consider the fact that you yourself are dangling between life and death, that you yourself could drop dead at any moment, whether it's heart or a car accident or anything. And I would encourage you to read in Luke chapter 13, where Jesus is talking about tragedies and the people whose blood was mingled with the sacrifices that got massacred, or the people on whom the Tower of Siloam fell. And do you know what Jesus' response is to the tragedy? It's not, hey, let's wallow in this, or hey, let's feel good about ourselves because we're better because stuff hasn't happened to us yet. He says instead, unless you repent, you too will perish. And so let's not get ourselves so caught up in this tragedy that we don't learn from it and we don't seek to continue to live life. And I think that's all I really want to say about this. So please like, comment, subscribe, share this video. My name's Ali Schwaga, and this has been 10 Points to Ponder.